Yael Rice is an assistant professor of art history at Amherst College. She specializes in art and the architecture of South Asia, Central Asia, and Iran, with particular focus on manuscripts and other portable arts of the 15th through 18th centuries. Before coming to Amherst College, she held the position of assistant curator of Indian and Himalayan art at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, where she curated a small exhibition of musically themed paintings and sculptures from South Asia. Professor Rice is currently teaching a survey course on the arts and architecture of India, as well as an upper-level course in digital and computational methods for art historical study. Students in the latter course are using the Mead Art Museum's collection of South Asian art as their primary data set, and they'll share their findings in a symposium scheduled for mid-November. So yeah, the bio really doesn't do enough to describe what an amazing faculty member and collaborator and curator Yael is. We've had the pleasure of having her do shows for us at the Mead and then leading these amazing classes where students are really diving into what it means to not only study art history, but see the way art objects live in our collections. So thank you, Yael. Suhail Yusuf Khan is a Sarangi player, vocalist, composer, and Ph.D. candidate in the Department of Music at Wesleyan University. His dissertation is entitled Bridge Overtones, Lessons from the Sarangi, and it will be the first in-depth ethnomusicological study written by a hereditary Sarangi player. He brings together expertise from a performance career that has extended over 20 years, creative ability, and academic research to find new modes of expression in Hindustani music, contemporary rock fusion, pop, folk, jazz, and experimental music. Suhail's ethnographic scholarship draws on his personal experience as an 8th generation musician belonging to a lineage of Hindustani musicians. He situates this musical tradition in a globalized context to help new audiences connect with the riches of this repertoire. He's been featured on more than 15 albums and is currently signed to Domino Records in the UK. And he's been featured, and this year his band, Yorkston, Thorne and Khan, released their 3rd album, Navarasa, 9 Emotions, which brings together Sufi devotional songs, Hindustani art music, UK folk, a jazz groove, and poetry from the Scottish poet Rabbie Burns and Sufi poet-philosopher Amir Khusro. So I'm just going to turn it over to these amazing presenters. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Suhail and Yael.
Thank you so much for those introductions, Danielle. I'm really I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled that Suhail is joining us for this afternoon. I'm really delighted to see so many members of our community, close and far, in our Zoom audience today. I'm going to switch over to sharing my desktop just to show you actually a couple of images to sort of break the ice, so to speak. So bear with me as I do that. Okay. By the way, Suhail has kindly included his email address here. So if you have questions for him following the presentation, you can follow up with him. Before we begin, though, I really want to extend my thanks foremost to Suhail for being here with us during a really busy time in his semester. I also want to thank the Tagliabue Fund, the Departments of Asian Languages and Civilizations, Art and the History of Art, the Program in Architectural Studies, and the Mead Art Museum for supporting this event. And finally, I want to give thanks to Danielle Amadeo, Carol Allman Morton, and Ifer Talabi for helping with the planning and behind the scenes logistics that has made this event possible. So I thought we could begin this conversation, Suhail, with an object from my domain of the world, so paintings on paper. And this object lives in the Mead Art Museum at Amherst College. And what we see here, just to kind of introduce all of us, this is a painting that belongs to a genre of Indian painting that was really popular between the 17th and 19th centuries. And these images or works really combine pictorial images like we see here with poetry. And we see some of that poetry up in the the top register of the page. And these works were really meant to depict or personify musical modes that were known and are known as rags or ragas and raganis. And this particular one, which is a depiction of Todi Ragani, is a particularly popular musical mode still performed today. But these types of paintings aren't exactly translations of musical experience, but the paintings and the poetry really seek instead to evoke a mood and an emotion associated with the musical mode. And I'll also add that these aren't just sort of idiosyncratic, individualized interpretations of musical modes either, neither on the part of the painter or the poet, but rather draw from standard iconography and color palettes that have long been associated with these musical modes. So Todi, for example, is almost always depicted as a woman, often a musician, who is shown often outdoors, longing for her beloved from whom she's been separated. And she's often also depicted with a couple deer and other animals that keep her company. So just to give you a kind of idea of how this iconography becomes standardized, we can look to another one of these depictions of a musical mode. This one also coming from Jaipur, but from about a century earlier. And we again see the female musician here. She's carrying a veena, and then the deer that accompany her. And just one more, because I think it might be one of my favorites. This one from the 17th century, showing Todi Ragani, where the beloved or the lover is accompanied by a maidservant. We see the two deer, but also a bear has joined the scene, and a peacock, who again are keeping the woman company. So in this way, we can think about these kinds of paintings, these depictions of musical modes, as kind of performances, as renditions of a kind of standard form or type. And furthermore, these were not produced as single one-offs, but rather were produced as parts of larger sets that were known as ragamalas, or which means a garland of musical modes. So the whole series would actually kind of string together a number of these depictions of musical modes. And these sets were ordered in such a way that in the standard ragamala painting set, you would have 36 paintings. And of these, 6 would depict male musical modes, or ragas, which were really conceived as the kind of husbands. And these each would be paired then with 5 wives, or raganis. These are the female musical modes. And altogether, these would create a kind of family, a ragamala series. Of course, over time, the ragamala series could grow to accommodate more musical modes, larger families, sometimes with sons and daughters, to the extent that we actually have ragamala series that contain 42 and even over 100 paintings of musical modes. This whole set actually is in the Mead Art Museum at Amherst College, and it's a bit unusual in that we have the complete set. So this is a kind of prized body of materials in our college museum. So having introduced this phenomenon of ragamala painting, I'm also aware that there are similarities, but also important differences with how musicians today and in the past have thought about, theorized, and performed musical modes. So I thought maybe we could begin, Suhail, if you could elaborate more on the meaning of this term rag, right? And furthermore, how Hindustani, Northern Indian musicians approach and have approached the performance and theory of musical modes.
Great. Well, First of all, thank you very much, everyone, for joining in today. And thank you, Yael, and everyone who's been involved in curating this amazing event. And for the wonderful introduction you guys did. Well, before we jump into the theoretical and also the philosophical aspect of what ragas and raginis are, what I'll do is just to break the my share of ice. I'll start with a very brief, small composition based on a raga, or actually a set of compositions, a garland of compositions, as they say in Hindustani music practices. And it'll be divided into three parts. The first part is a brief introduction, which has a terminology called alap. And the idea here is that you're revealing the mood of the rag, as Yale say, the emotion of the rag, which will swift to a composition which is tied to a mid-tempo rhythmic cycle, which will have a lyrical content behind it, a theme, a motif. And as Yale was describing, that mostly that motif is a woman. Most of these songs are written from the point of a woman. And then I will move on to this crescendo, which mostly is the ending part or reaching to a conclusion of a scene. And then we'll start disclosing and probably go into a discussion about what you guys felt like in relation to what Yale was describing about emotions and the motif and uh, the thematic philosophical content behind the rag. So just to introduce this fellow, it's this instrument is called the Sarangi, and the etymology of Sarangi comes from a word Sarangi, meaning an instrument of hundreds of colors. So as Yael was describing, that rags are also depicted and understood as colors. So the idea in Sarangi's name is kind of used as a metaphor that this instrument can produce hundreds of those ragas, which, believe me, is a lot of ragas, to learn and to understand the rules and regulations behind them. So anyway, without taking any further time, I will play a rag of this particular time of the day, and we'll get into detail that why am I saying that this particular time of the day, what does that mean? And it's called God Sarang. segment. For that, I'm changing the rhythmic cycle. So bear with me for a second, please. Well, in pre-COVID times, I would have a real human being playing this instrument with me. Thank you for listening. So that was a very brief structure, and I would say a mere example of what a performance practice looks like in Hindustani music. So in terms of what a rag is, so scholars have defined rags, uh, something which has a combination of notes, and those combination notes should color your mind. They should heighten the state of the mind in a way that it should have an emotional affect on you. So again, that's where color is an extremely important phenomena here. Everything is related to color. In fact, um, in olden days, amongst regional slangs of musicians, people used to say a mood as a color as well. And that comes from a word rang and sarangi. So they would say this is a rang, this is a color, this mood, and that mood is obviously related to the emotional feelings of human beings, their nature, their tradition, the culture, their rituals. It is all related to society around you. And those colors are then kind of combined with these theoretical musicological rules and regulations, which kinds of brings in front of you a beautiful amalgamation of performance and practice and art and craft and knowledge and technique and spirituality. So religion is also an extremely important phenomena here, and also used widely amongst rag practitioners. So the kind of rag what you guys heard right now is from the northern Indian music practice, which is called Hindustani music. And the reason why we call it Hindustani music, because before India got its name, India, from the colonial rulers, it was not really a country, but it was a combination of small little princely kingdoms. And the biggest one, at least from the Middle Ages, came to be known as identified as Hindustan. And one of the dynasties, which is a very important dynasty, especially in the Middle Ages from Indian history, is the Mughal dynasty, who also gave this world this amazing wonder called the Taj Mahal. And the Mughals specifically played a significant role in terms of development of arts and in development of architecture and in development of music. And what today came to be identified as Hindustani music is actually um, a, um, a spearhead, sophisticated version of Hindustani music, which came to be known from the efforts of Mughals.
Mhm, mhm,
And talking about the role of women, um, in the 17th century, Hindustani music was going through an amazing transition. And this is when the Mughals were actually encouraging women performers who came to be identified as courtesans
mhm,
to come and participate in the performance. And Mughals were patrons of music, of, as I said, architecture, gardens, XYZ, everything related to art. And so, I mean, think of opera. You know how opera has scenes and their actors and actresses and bands of musicians playing with them. So I'm not saying that it was an equivalent of opera, what's happening in Hindustani music, but it is similar. I mean, it's kind of the similar uh, musical roles going on around them, and that's why every composition has a heroine, has a hero, and as Yael was saying, that often the painting is depicting a woman who's kind of longing for her beloved, or sometimes also when she's embracing the beloved and they're having a fantastic time, or they're kind of enjoying the spring season, and or they're kind of uh, in some kind of a spiritual ecstatic self. So it all comes from that particular philosophy. And before this era, uh, music in India was particularly approached for the practice of religious reasons only. So it was, I mean, all the songs were written from the perspective of I am in devotion of the Lord, and Lord the Almighty, and that's how it kind of was mainly perceived into temples, and then finally it got into courts, and then the kind of the subject matter changed as well.
mhm. Suhail, I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about sort of the theory of Hindustani music. You know, what do scales, for example, look like? How do you tune the sarangi?
Yeah. So, well, that's a very heavy question, Yael. I think we can write a dissertation on that. Yeah. So, just like any musical style, Hindustani music also has scale degrees, and there are 7 scale degrees, just like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Although we don't use those terminology, but we use sa, re, ga, ma, pa, dha, ni, sa, which is a descending, and sa, ni, dha, pa, ma, ga, re, sa.
Mhm,
However, things become quite interesting here, because the idea is not to be, I mean, maybe precise is not the right word, but the idea is it's more about how you're expressing those notes. It's more about how, obviously, precision is there, technique is there, everything is there, the knowledge is there, but the, I mean, idea is you're not thinking like you're in an orchestra and you have to kind of match your tone to a cellist who is sitting right next to you, or a violinist or a pianist or a violist, or XYZ, because it's not chamber music.
mm,
um, but the idea is, obviously, there is drone, which is one of the three most important elements, and the melody, which is sa, re, ga, ma, pa, dha, ni, sa, or do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and then there is rhythm.
mhm,
So the idea is, while keeping the foundations of these three elements intact, you are expressing yourself as who you are individually in that particular moment.
mm,
And that's how the music is designed. And that comes from an application of the use of microtones.
mm,
So do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do are 7 notes, But and microtones, by the way, are used or have been used in many different musical styles. For example, Central Asian musical styles use it. Middle Eastern, also up to some extent of Southeast Asian as well. But and all of these styles use it in a different way. However, Indian music system says that every note has 4 microtones,
Mm.
and unless you kind of use the 4 microphones totally, you cannot produce a note. So if I say, if I use only 2, then I would produce a note like this. So it's like kind of dangling between, it's hitting and pulling back like that. Rather than if I want to sing a note, it would sing like so that's when I'm kind of utilizing the whole um, resonant vibration of those 4 microtones, which are also known as shrutis. And interestingly, these microtones gives you a flexibility and independence of, rather than singing notes like sa re ga ma pa da ni sa or do re mi fa sol la ti do, in contrast to do re. Actually, why am I singing do re mi fa? Sa re ga ma pa da ni sa sa ni da pa pa ma ga re sa. So I don't know if you can feel, but
Mm.
I'm kind of connecting 2 notes. There's a pushing and pulling of melodies going on, and that kind of enhances the glamour of this musical expression which musicians practice.
Mm. So I'm really getting the sense that there's a lot of variation, and within even a single tone, you have these microtones. So in terms of the rag that you just performed,
Hmm.
or if you were to perform rag tudi,
Hmm.
would it sound similar to another musician's rendition? I mean, where would you hear the similarities and where would you hear the differences?
Well, for that, you have to have some experience and some knowledge
Mhm,
of what's happening first. You
mhm,
should be able to understand and define uh, these really intricate and highly defined um, nuances going on within a composition. And you're absolutely right. I mean, what you heard from me, you can hear. I mean, from in my grandfather's recording, and he used to play this rag a lot, and there are various recordings of him have been released. It will sound absolutely different. It will sound, I
mhm,
mean, forget about the recordings of my grandfather. I mean, if I play whatever the exact repertoire I played right now, if I play it after 2 hours, it will be different because my state of mind, my I'm living as a different human being. We are constantly changing. So yes and no. I mean, I don't know if I'm answering your question, Yale, but you can try and copy exactly what's going on, but in most of the cases you can't, and you're not supposed to as well. So every note, especially in an instrument like sarangi, sorry, I should have told you, it's a completely fretless instrument.
mm,
And the whole idea is that each and every note you play is kind of composed, produced, um, um, played exactly in the same exactly in that particular moment, and then it cannot be repeated because it is designed, the instrument is designed like that. It is highly sensitive, and it is played from your upper part of your cuticles or nails. So instead of like pressing the string down with my fingertips, I am sliding it on the string, and that particular feature makes it very close to the human voice. So
mhm,
sarangi in North Indian music is regarded the closest instrument to the human voice,
mm,
and then it also gives it um, freedom and flexibility to produce those microtones I was talking about. Yeah.
mm,
So I mean, if I were to play Tori right now, Just to give you an example, it will sound like this. And there's a beautiful composition which kind of resonates with this painting I'm seeing right now. And one of the amazing singer, Pandit Bhimsen Joshi, used to sing it. And I'll just share the a line with it and see if you guys can hear a resemblance. Mm. लांगर का करियां जिन मारो, लांगर का करियां. So again, the idea is that there's this woman who's lost in the forest, is longing for something, and she's confused, and she has this instrument on her shoulder, and she's kind of wandering about in the north central plains of India with uh, in the midst of a summer morning or afternoon morning, because Thodi the morning raga, and yeah, and she's expressing herself. Langar ka kariyan jin maro, langar ka kariyan jin maro more, angvahi laga jaye langar ka. So just to let you know the meaning of the lyrics, she's kind of renouncing the society and she's going into the forest. She's kind of fed up with whatever the society has done to her or she's done to the society. She's renouncing the materialistic world and kind of going into the forest. So that's the thematic behind this ragini or this composition. Yeah.
So I have so many other questions for you. I really want to talk about the kind of emotional component, and also this issue of the temporal, right? The association of rags with times of the day, with seasons. But I just have one other question relating to your own training. So when I learned to play piano as a little girl, I learned to read music, and my training involved reading sheet music and then reproduce or performing it based on very precise instructions in terms of how you play hard or softly and so on. So I'm wondering what your training as a musician looked like.
It was pretty similar, Yale. I mean, it was conservatory style, although I didn't go to a music school because in Hindustani music, the music schools they came to be identified as gharanas, which is a terminology for household, and these household acted like music schools because it is a practice, was a practice until the 20th century, only conducted by hereditary specialists. But the environment was absolutely similar like yours. On the other hand, talking about sheet music, uh, we were discouraged from reading because we were allowed to make notes, we were allowed to write down a composition, we were allowed to make as much copies, blah blah blah, but we were never allowed to look at the sheet and play, because the whole idea is to learn the composition by heart, grasp it in your body, and perform it, as I was saying earlier, in a way how you are feeling in that moment. Like, for example, the way I sang the composition in Tori right now, I might have like 2 cups of coffee and just sing it like 20 times more faster than what I had. And that's why I didn't have any coffee, by the way, today, because I just didn't want to play too fast. And talking about emotions, what not writing on a sheet of paper does to you is it kind of lets you feel the composition more rather than having a visual chart right outside it. And I'm not comparing or saying one is right or one is wrong. I mean, the goal is different. I mean, you are reading music because obviously there will be an ensemble of 50 musicians playing together. There's no way 50 people can, uh, learn a composition by heart and execute it exactly the same comma by comma, dot by dot. It's very difficult. And that's why in Hindustani music, you are not supposed to be. I mean, even if it's written in a certain way, you have to play how you heard it, how it was passed on to you. So all these compositions, centuries old compositions, have been passed on like an oral language from one generation to another. I mean, I that's how my guru passed on to me, his guru passed on to him, XYZ, and yeah.
Mhm.
And then I can see you've kind of just pulled out the nine rasas slides, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, yeah.
you're gonna
So
say something?
speaking of emotions and
Hmm.
aesthetic theory, yeah.
Well, nine emotions, and emotions, by the way, is a highly talked about philosophical subject, not only in India, but I mean, Spinoza and Descartes talks about it, the French philosophers. Although their taxonomy came out, if my memory goes out, in the Middle Ages. Um, Indian ancient music treatises, the Natya Shastra, which was written in the between second and the third century, and this is what we know. I mean, we don't know the traces before that; they haven't been found yet.
Mhm.
Talks about them and mentions them from the context of uh, dance and theater,
Mhm.
and this treatise is listed the set of these nine emotions which you are seeing in front of your screen. And these nine emotions are kind of stand as the main pillars or motifs or the foundations of how each and every raga has been composed, or the rules and regulations have been set out. So just to give you an example, I won't go into detail on all nine, but there could be an emotion of sadness, which is karuna, and it can sound like this in a raga. Or hasya, or joy. Or Raudra, which usually kind of talks about deities, saints, and their bigger than life grandeur, would sound something like this. रज सुनो दस्तगीर पीर मोरिया रज सुनो दस्तगीर. So there's mysticism attached to it. And then you can go to Shanta, which is very peaceful, and yogis loved it, which will sound something like this. Or Veera, heroism, which often depicts warriors. So, in this composition from 17th century, which was written for Muhammad Shah, one of the last Mughal rulers, and even from the composition, you can figure out that how a scene of a warrior in the battlefield is kind of depicted. So. mm, Gama pani sa ni pa ma pa ga ma ni pa ga ma je sa tu hai Mohammad Shah darbar re ni ja mu teen zuha. So there is more movement there, in contrast to Shringar, which is love. Sorry, I didn't mean to give you so many examples, but I mean
No
that's
apologies necessary.
thank you. But that's how the kind of motif is
Yeah.
laid out behind these ragas. And also, just to add one important thing, which before we move on to the next subject, Yale, these ragas are also perceived as human beings.
Mhm.
They're perceived as personalities.
Mhm.
So often my teacher, my grandfather, my uncle, they used to say, remember the face of this raga. And as a kid I was like, face of a raga, what does that mean? Obviously I didn't have the intelligence then, or the understanding. Or they also used to use the words, remember the walk of this raga,
Mhm.
remember the um, the um, the sonic beauty, the size, the shape, and it actually makes sense because, as I was explaining you, some ragas were in their movements much more faster in relation to some rags were like so you can actually envision like, oh yeah, like a huge, almost like a king sitting on an elephant is arriving, in comparison to "Re pa ga ma da pa ga ma pa re sa da pa." This is a young prince on a horse is kind of going around, in relation to pa ni sa re ga sa re pa ga. This is when a maiden or a prince is kind of enjoying a beautiful breeze in the evening of a palace.
It's incredible. I'm sure I'm not the only one who can say I can feel that. I can feel what you're describing and performing for us. And of course, this idea of emotion and
Mm,
this theory of rasas is really what connects, among other things, of course, too, but
mm,
really connects the arts of making music
mm.
and painting and poetry, because that kind of emotional core lies at the heart as well in terms of producing pictorial depiction, right? It's
Mhm.
all about evoking precisely what you are evoking as a musician too, through images and through text.
Absolutely, El, and that is the idea. In fact, when these musical practices used to take place in the royal courts, the musician used to arrive, sometimes with dancers, sometimes without, and they never announced the name of the raga. The idea was, and to just go there and start playing or singing, and these royal patrons who were the connoisseurs and sometimes musicians themselves
Yeah.
would understand what's happening, and they would understand the movements, they would understand the melodic shifts, and it is an embodiment, and this is a huge debate and also an area of study in ethnomusicology, where scholars have said that Hindustani music comes into the embodiment of performance when there is a significant role as a participant of an audience as well. So often, if you are in a Hindustani music performance, you would hear people nodding their heads like that, or some people are, they're in ecstatic bliss and they start to cry, or some of them are raising their hands, or saying gestures on small little subtle melodic movements, which is a very different way of consuming arts as compared to anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, you're reminding me of my experiences as a member of audiences of these kinds of performances where, um, you know, as opposed to kind of clapping at
Mm.
certain moments, people will kind of call out,
Yeah, yeah,
which is really amazing, and it's the sort of it's a sign of, or gesture of appreciation, admiration, but also um, a way of recognizing uh,
yes.
this is masterful. This performer has, kind of riffed on this rag in this way that I understand to be phenomenal. Yeah, and it will
Exactly.
happen right in the middle of the performance, so they don't wait till the end to call out.
Exactly. No, you've just kind of explained it in such a beautiful manner, that experience of being there as an audience,
Mhm.
and the whole idea of that audience performers relationship is to lead the performance into areas, zones of sonic speciality, which
Mhm.
probably they wouldn't when they're in their own practice rooms. So what these connoisseurs or rasikas, as they're called in Hindustani terminologies, they push them by telling them that we know what you're doing is extremely difficult, and wow, that is amazing, you've taken us to this beautiful ecstatic space, wow. And then the performer gets that confidence, and then the performer thinks like, okay, well, I was very nervous up till now, but if you are seeing what I am seeing, let me take you somewhere else. And then there is this amazing sonic space going around. And
Mhm.
what this used to do in the olden, and sorry, I might be shifting and going off tangent, but
Right.
in those days, in the days of the Mughals, if that's what we're talking about, but many other rulers throughout India, ragas used to come out alive as supernatural beings. And Catherine Schofield Yale, which you also heavily use in your resources,
Mhm.
she talks about these interesting incidents which have been noted in Indo-Persian treatises, and she's used the painting of Rag Todi, where Shah Jahan was listening to the grandson of the great grandson of the great Tansen, who is probably one of the most important figure in North Indian or Hindustani music, and he got into this ecstatic bliss or ecstatic state of mind, which is called often wajd, uh, that he and all the assembly members, they saw that painting in front of them coming out alive, but not in the form of painting, but in the form of a scene. So imagine you're going to like a 3D concert hall where a band is playing in front of you, and there are these holograms and images coming out, and you're all seeing that, but without those devices. And obviously they were using astrology, and they were using Pythagorean tuning and all sorts of physics to have that experience together and consume that ecstatic bliss. And also, I mean, the musicians were at par excellence as well.
That's extraordinary. Could you touch upon this issue of the temporal?
Yeah.
You've already, referred to certain rags that are
Hmm.
performed at certain times of the day. And so why is
Yeah.
that important?
Well, it's actually, just to give you a small little historic background. So it was borrowed via Arabic and Persian treatises into Hindustani music. And the Arabs and the Persians borrowed it from the Greeks, who
Hmm.
borrowed it from Mesopotamians. And I don't know who Mesopotamians borrowed it from. Pythagoras, as a philosopher, came up with this theory that every planet or a celestial body has a ring sitting on it, and it is ringing by making a sound, and it is we can't, as mortals, we can't hear it. And all those celestial bodies are constantly ringing. And he came up with this Pythagorean ratio of tuning your instrument in a certain way that you can actually start resonating your instrument with those celestial bodies. And what that would do, it would bring a much bigger and a grander effect in your playing. And this is not effect but affect with an A. And it, I mean, again, it kind of it how Hindustani musicians perceived it, it was through yoga and spirituality and stuff. Uh, and and what they did was, coming back to Hindustani music, so Hindustani musicians borrowed that Pythagoras thought into their own practice, and they started assigning different melodic combinations of notes to different designation of the day.
Hmm.
So just to have a much more bigger effect in their playing, and also to uh, depict sonic pictures of, okay, when I'm playing this rag, I'm feeling this is midday.
Hmm.
When I'm playing this rag, I'm feeling this is a scene in the middle of the night, because it's the movement is lazy as compared to, noon, where people are kind of looking for lunch and roaming around here and there. And again, I mean, this there is a lot of cultural emphasis laid out to it as well. So you need to understand the lyrical content, and you need to also understand why this particular rag is called morning rag. For example, a very basic morning rag, which is very popular and often used in Hindustani music, has this melodic phrase which often depicts that a sun is rising. And as a child, I grew up listening to that. And whenever I hear that, I actually feel that the sun is rising above from the Himalayas. That's how a typical Indian morning would be. So it sounds something like this. So just three notes for me. Ga ma re is the movement of the sun rising for me. And it kind of, and then Sada Ni Sa. This is Darbari, which was composed by Tansen. is a midnight raga, and I can feel, oh yeah, it has that quietness, that mystical resonance of what a night is. Or in relation to what I played sarang for you, it has more melodic movements, which kind of, to me, depicts the busyness of the day. And then it kind of goes so on. So yeah, so just to summarize, this was a Greek thought which Hindustani musicians borrowed, and they used it to have inspiration of their natural surroundings, and again, to also have that essence of how Hindustani music is designed in correlation to what you are feeling right now. So even if when I was taught, when I was given the beginning lessons, I was given 3 ragas to practice: morning, afternoon, and evening, to kind of naturally understand that these are the 3 times you will be practicing, and then you'll be doing other things, playing and da, da, da. So my guru said that if you want to play practice in the morning, practice this rag. If you want to practice in the afternoon, practice this rag. And if you practice in the evening, practice this rag. And basically those 3 ragas would then become your expression for 300, 3000. That is like your that becomes your dissertation. That is like your, grammar books, which eventually describes your musicality. Yeah.
You describe it beautifully.
Thank you.
I want to, so we'll open up this session to questions in just a few minutes, but with my last question, I want to change course a little bit. We've both looked at this painting separately. Now we're looking at it together. This is a painting that was produced at the Mughal court in the 17th century. And of course, it's of interest to us because one of the figures is in fact playing a sarangi. But what I wanted to ask you about is these kinds of paintings that come from the Mughal court, they were really made for consumption by elites, right?
Mm-hmm.
You needed to have some capital, some status to even be able to acquire a work like this. So what about the status of the sarangi player?
Wow. Well, sarangi players, I'm just thinking where to begin, because it's a very, very dense topic. And also, it also has various issues aligned to it and blah, 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 blah. So, just to begin with, and that'll also give me some time to rethink where I'm coming from. So if you are wondering why that sarangi is so small as compared to mine, yeah, just to give you an idea and historical background, sarangi as an instrument has evolved over a period of time. And by the time it became like this, it was called sarangi. But before that, it had various different names, and in various different musical treatises, it's been also mentioned as a version of veena, which is the most authentic Indian instrument. So sarangi as an instrument came into the realm of musical practices as an instrument of saints, of sages, of yogis. So it was a very ingrained instrument into the folk regional life of people. And in fact, in the earlier treatises, sarangi is not even mentioned. They don't. No one mentioned sarangi, and this is like the most prominent board instrument of the country. And if you compare it to Europe, board instruments are really a consumption of the high class, and everywhere else also in, Central Asia as well. But somehow sarangi was always ignored. And scholars have argued about it, that why was the reason, and a lot of saints have written about it and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going into the social issues right now. So it remained as an instrument of the folks, and of the saints and the faqirs. And here, in this particular scene, there is a dervish or a Sufi saint who's standing and who is depicted. He's getting into this state of ecstasy, what we were talking about earlier, this state of vajad, musical ecstasy. And apparently this sarangi player is is a dancing sarangi player, and that's how the manuscript attached to the painting describes it, is dancing around it and a kind of helping the Sufi or the saint to get into this state. Um, and what I understand and what scholars have understood is that this was the main role of sarangi players. They were either associated with these Sufi saints, they were either bards, so they were also storytellers. They were somehow also hired by armies to go with them as their bands and kind of tell stories or kind of drive the enemy away. And a lot of them used to get killed and stuff. But then, when in the 16th century or early 17th century, let's say, the Hindustani music was transitioning. And as I said earlier, this is when the subject matter from just God was kind of changing to love, romance, womanhood. Courtesans were becoming the most highest pairs of taxpayers as entertainers. And they had this really highly respected place in the society before colonialism came and started stigmatizing them. Sarangi players kind of forged their way by getting a favor from the courtesans.
Mm.
So that's how sarangi came to be identified as an amazing instrument to accompany the voice, because the courtesans said, we love this instrument. Until then, or before the courtesans got into the performance stage, voice was usually accompanied by beans or venas, which were very heavy, um, resonant instrument. But when courtesans came, they said, no, we want something which has a balance, of masculine and feminine. And sarangi, being regarded as a feminine instrument, for them had that balance, had that beautiful timbre and tone. So just to answer your question, that was the social status of the sarangi players. And then they kind of became court musicians themselves. And then obviously colonialism happened, and then courtesans were stigmatized, and then sarangi players were stigmatized themselves. And yeah, and still have been. But I mean, thanks to globalization and other things, it's changing now. Yeah.
Thank you so much.